Welcome back to Book Dragon Banter, a podcast where we three discuss books. I am Zinzi Bree. With me are Sage Moreaux and Katherine Suzette. This month, we read The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang.
Let's talk about how Wang broke all of our hearts.
There's going to be a whole ton of I'm trying to pronounce these things correctly and I'm butchering them, and I apologize, but I'm going to try. I'm going to do my best.
Likewise. I will likewise be butchering.
Likewise be
Not
butchering.
on purpose.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. If you read the book beforehand, did you need as many tissues as I did? Because I actually counted the pile of tissues that I had on the floor after reading this book. And there was more than 20 tissues that I went through in this one. I felt like the author just reached into my chest. Ugh.
Yeah, they did.
For Book Club with Book Dragon Banter, we are doing books that are culturally and geographically influenced by different places all across the globe in their fantasy theming. So for Sword of Kaigen, it has a very distinctly Japanese flavor. That was part of why I picked it for us to do, as well as it was very highly rated. I did not know going into it that it was self-published. I thought it was a traditionally published book.
Really?
And then found out, yes, partway through reading that it was self-published and not traditionally published. And that changes the lens on what I will be critical of and not critical of, because with traditionally published, I would have had different expectations of the book than I do now, knowing that it was self-published. It changes my perspective.
It might change mine a little bit as well.
The author, M.L. Wang, is an author, martial artist, and self-described recluse currently hiding somewhere in Wisconsin with her maroon-bellied parakeet, Sulu. My understanding is that she does not spend a lot of time on social media. However, I do believe you can follow her parakeet, Sulu, if you are interested. Her books include Blood over Brighthaven, The Sword of Kaigen, and the Volta Academy Chronicles, which she published under Maya Lin Wang. You can find out more on her website, mlwangbooks.com. And also, this book that we just read, The Sword of Kaigen, won the 2019-2020 Self-Published Fantasy Blog-Off, which is an annual literary contest run by author Mark Lawrence to promote self-published fantasy books. I thought that was cool.
That is cool. I didn't know about that.
Mm-hmm.
I did this both as an audiobook and as an ebook. I bounced between the two.
Oh, so not at the same time, but like back and forth?
No. Oh, so I actually did some of it at the same time, and there was a sentence that the audiobook narrator read that I checked the ebook and it was not in there. And then there was later another sentence that had the word work, and he used a different word than what it's in the ebook. So there is actually a slight difference between the audiobook off of Audible by Andrew Tell and the ebook copy currently available on Kindle, which is where I read it.
Interesting.
And
I
I
wonder
have
if they
softcover.
adapted it for audio and changed some things, like some
I
editorial
don't-
stuff.
I don't know
What
if
was
it was
next?
that, or maybe because it's self-published, if M.L. Wang just did an update with better editing, if there were typos. This is a 600-page book, right? In that amount of time, I'd expect to see at least one or two typos, and I don't remember seeing typos, but I do remember the discrepancy between the audiobook, the ebook having just slight tweaks of, and they weren't hugely informative things. They were just, maybe there was a duplicate sentence here or something that needed to get cut.
I did find one typo. I have this edition, which is a soft cover from 2018.
Okay. So, Katherine, did you do audiobook then?
I did, and I did only audiobook. And so I noticed some things that I would have pointed out as an editor for the author. But again, now that I know that they're self-pub, it makes a lot more sense that these things made it into the final version. But all the same, I'll find things in TradPub as well. So perfection not required for me to enjoy the story.
I noticed that as a writer, I've started reading differently. I used to just read purely for enjoyment, and now I read for enjoyment and character development and story structure. And I imagine as an editor for Katherine, it's like exceedingly more.
Yeah.
Maybe. I can just read for enjoyment. Like, I just read a 9-book series that were cozies that were pretty horrendously written, but they were hilarious, and I enjoyed the characters and the banter, so I was like, it fits the vibe, so I'm going with it. But also, if I were to be hired as an editor for that particular book series, it'd be a lot better.
Wow.
Love it.
Yeah, still enjoyed it. Still enjoyed it.
Yeah. Back to this book in particular. Spoiler-free recommendations. What is for someone who listens to us and then based on what we say here, they may or may not go read the book. What would your guys' recommendations? What are your spoiler-free thoughts?
If you like books that that wrench your emotions around in a very good way, it's beautifully done, then this is absolutely the book for you. This is also a book that doesn't focus on the character we think it's going to focus on. It focuses on, sorry, this is a tiny bit of a spoiler, but it focuses more on the mother character. So for people who want to relate to the MC a little bit more and maybe they're a little older or something like that, then I absolutely think this is really good too.
I was going to say, if you like badass female characters who are good at wielding swords as well as magic, who are determined and extremely emotionally strong, but go through an emotional arc, then this book would be for you. Also, tons of great martial arts scenes. Tons of great, like, fighting with swords and magic.
I would like to say, if you watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, but wanted a grown-up version where it's the Air Nation that attacks and not Fire Nation, with a whole lot of grit and realism and some very, very sickly written fight scenes.
Yes.
And then you don't mind having the camera, for the most part, follow a woman's perspective, a mother's perspective. This book might be for you. This is a writer I didn't feel like she was poetic. She's cinematic. I was watching this book in my brain like a movie.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much the whole time, like from the get-go. So if you like books like that, this might be for you.
Also think that it was a really great example for you to pull in the Avatar: The Last Airbender, because I kept thinking that along the way. But Emma Wang did bring in various versions of the elements and the talents that come out of that are not found in the Airbender series. So I thought that her choices there were excellent and very interesting.
Yeah. I would not in any way be like, this is fan fiction where it's no. It is not that. There's too much.
Yeah.
Avatar: The Last Airbender is a really easy pop cultural reference to give a vision for what this story is like. But it's not the only one. There's loads of anime that deals with elemental powers that are other good comparisons. That one is the most prevalent to me from my experience with them. Content warning. Awful things happened. This is a war story.
Yeah.
Really terrible things happened, and we are going to talk about them. Podcast is explicit because there was murder, there was gore, there was sexual assault in the course of this story, and we're going to talk about those things. Be aware that's coming up.
It wasn't like super graphically in detail described, but it was there. So depending on the depth of which you're comfortable with those things being on a page, this one was not in hyper detail. It wasn't hyper focused in on those things, but it was impactful for sure.
I agree that it wasn't like super in-depth with the gore descriptions, but I also think that like because of her style of writing, it like every description kind of got you in the chest a little bit. Even though the description itself wasn't highly detailed, you could feel the feeling of the intensity of it.
I was definitely crying while doing the dishes, reading certain parts.
Spoilers from here on out. All the spoilers. Just to be clear, all the spoilers. Good golly, because I got a lot to talk about.
Right.
And I have to start with not only did I have, and yes, okay, weird fact, I counted my tissues from this. Because I was reading this, I was sitting on my bed, my husband was next to me, and he was just like on TikTok or something. And he looks over at me, and there was just like silent tears streaking down my face. And he's like, oh, babe. And he started holding my hand. as I'm sitting there crying. And at one point he left the room and I just got to a spot in the book, and we can talk about this more as we're going through like the story and what happens. But I wanted to throw, if I had the physical book, I would have thrown it, but it was on my Kindle and it's too expensive to throw. But if I had the physical copy, I'd have frickin' chucked that thing across the room. And I ended up taking, I will post it here. I took a photo of, this is my angry look, tear-streaked face. That's what it's going to look like for you, for people who are audio and can't see it on YouTube, because I will put it here. Well, this is my look of hatred and admiration for the author who just ripped my heart out.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of admiration, the way that ML Wang tackled the bittersweet reality of the MC's arc, that I think that's what pulled on me the deepest.
The main character you are referencing is Misaki.
Misaki, yeah.
Which, okay. I take issue. This is a narrator problem.
Oh.
Kept saying Misaki. And every time I have seen that name spelled, and when I've watched Japanese shows, it's Misaki. For me, Misaki is probably how I will say it going forward, and say it however you are comfortable with and how you read it in your brain.
Mm-hmm. That the author approved it, and also I am extraordinarily American. So I'll pronounce it, since I learned Italian, I'll pronounce Italian things correctly, like bruschetta. Like you can't call it bruschetta or whatever else it is that
I call it bruschetta.
or bruschetta, like some people do.
Bruschetta.
So it's bruschetta.
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 Yeah, so that
Gnocchi.
kind of thing. Yeah, like I will pronounce those things correctly because I've actually learned. But other than that, I tend to bring my fully American, like Misaki, because the accent is what I'm familiar
Misaki.
with, and I'm
Misaki-kun.
the
I also
author
thought
approved
Misaki.
it. Misaki.
We'll have to read an Italian book at some point. Italian fantasy.
Yeah. Ooh. I look forward to that. So, our main characters in this story was Mamoru, Misaki, and
Takaru.
Takaru? Yeah.
Takaru.
Takeru.
Can I just say that I was reading along and I was
Maybe
taking
we
like
do need
all
to-
of these notes on who was who and what the heck, because there was so many different, I'm sure culturally accurate or influenced culturally nicknames for people and honorifics and so forth. And then like halfway through, I was like, wait a minute, I can't believe there's not a glossary. There is completely a glossary.
There's
and
a glossary and there's a cast of characters on the ebook. I just pulled up the cast of characters.
By the time I realized that
And
I had already
maps.
figured everything out, the maps and stuff were in the front. I would have liked the glossary and whatnot in the beginning so that I found it, because I am so adverse to reading that and spoiling something for myself by looking on the last page that I didn't look in the back to see if there was a glossary. So there is. I don't know if you listen to the audiobook, if you get that.
No, I did not
so
get that.
the audiobook does not have the glossary. It does not have the author's note that's at the end either. And the ebook actually has on the front, it goes, hey, if you're reading this on an e-reader, it will be difficult to access the glossary while you are reading because it's at the back of the book. Here's a link to the web page, and she has the glossary on a web page. But the glossary is separate from the cast of characters, but I would have loved also seeing the link to the cast of characters, because even just looking at the cast of characters, you've got Tatsuki, Takashi, Takaru, Misaki, Mamoru, like so many names also begin with the same letter that are main characters. And I know that's a naming device that's culturally relevant. It just, but it also makes it difficult as a reader who's not familiar with those to keep everybody straight in your head.
Yeah, definitely with the audio, I had to figure out contextually sometimes who was talking, because I would hear the first sound and put one of the characters' like images in my head, and then they'd keep talking. I'd be like, oh, no, it's that one. Okay, got it.
So our main characters were Mamoru, Misaki, and Takeru, Takeru. And it does actually say that in the, like on the back of the book, it mentions all three of them. So that it's about them is not a surprise. What was a surprise to me, because it opens with Mamoru, then when it switched to Misaki's perspective and that she is the majority perspective that we get the story from, I was not expecting that. And for her to be a mother, for her to be a mother of 4 children, for her to be she's not some spring chicken. It's not just one baby that she's had. This is a woman who's timeline wise in her like between 30s and 40s is what the math that my brain did. And also Takeru is older, so there's an age gap between them, and that's not fully explained how much of an age gap. It could be 10 years, it could be 15. I didn't feel like the way he was portrayed as it being more than maybe 15 years her senior.
I would say 10, but it doesn't specify.
But it's just to have this character represented in fantasy when I have never seen that.
Yeah.
That alone makes this book such a standout. And then to how masterfully her arc is handled between the starting point of the story where she is in a place of really resenting her entire life, but putting on a false persona of smiling obedience, to where she ends up at the end of the story in a place of acceptance and genuine love for her life and what the future holds because of the experience that she goes through. But in the meantime, the story starts with Mamoru, and because he's a 14-year-old boy going off to training school for the martial arts, like that opening felt so typical, like going into I've just clicked onto an anime and here's the starting scene, the kid's going off to school.
Yep.
So getting this other and unexpected point of view was just that much more shocking because the introduction is so familiar. And I also have to compliment the author in that not using Mamoru, but using Cholhi, the friend new friend that comes into school and is the outside perspective that breaks the illusion that Mamoru is under about his family and even his town's place in the world and how important they are to the empire. But like Cholhi being that outsider and having those conversations was such a great way to introduce the world to the reader, because Mamoru was introducing it to Cholhi. And then we were also getting characterization of Cholhi where he's scoffing at it all and making these sly comments about how, oh, you're not as great as you think you are. You don't know the truth kind of stuff. So, and we do get, sorry, I'm just monologuing here. We do get Takeru's perspective in one chapter, in one part of a scene. And that's just once in the entire book,
which I was very grateful for.
Yes, I appreciate it, and
yeah.
it was needed for the scene that was happening. And I wonder if it would have felt different if there had been more of that interlaced in the story.
I definitely think so, because to me he was almost like a minor antagonist all along. Yeah, he was the dad, the husband, but he was this cold man that his wife was afraid of, his children were afraid of. They didn't want to disappoint him. They wanted to show that they could, and he was seemingly very easily disappointed in them. And so that before the actual battling started, that was kind of like that, and the disconnect around their town and the way that the rest of the empire was perceived through the eyes of the friend. I forget his name. But those were like the two antagonistic elements to me at first, other than Misaki's whole own like inner strife that she was going through. But if you had Takeru seated in earlier, then you would have had a completely different perspective of his characterization. I think you would have liked him as soon, because I did end up liking him towards the end. And for the longest time, I was so angry with him. Felt a lot of disappointment in him as a father and a husband and a town leader.
And you're supposed to feel that because that's part of what Misaki is experiencing and dealing with, and leads up to the second climax in this story, because this didn't have, to me, it didn't have just one big one. It had two. There was one bigger than the other, as far as one was an action climax and one was an emotional climax. But there were two in the context of the story. And I structurally wish that was not the case, because that did make the book feel unbalanced. It did make the end of the book, and there were also, knowing that this was self-published, knowing that the original vision for this story was that it was not a standalone, it was a prequel, and that meant it had to have ties leading into other things that were going to happen in the world and other characters that were going to be followed. I understand why there's other characters and some plot threads featured in the story, but I genuinely wish there was a version of this that was maybe 150 pages less, where those threads and additional characters and things were cut and set aside, and that we did have this very distilled focus without those trailing threads that went off into nowhere, because the book and the series is discontinued for the foreseeable future, according to the author and her website.
Right. It did read like a prequel, and I kept feeling that way. And I did not know that until this moment, with you telling me that it was originally intended to be that way. But I was absolutely thinking all throughout, I was like, okay, this is really, really good. And I feel like it sets the basis for this world, this bittersweet arc, the acceptance of things as they are, instead of making people get their comeuppance and then getting what you actually genuinely want in life. And things like that. It was setting the world up. It was setting Hiroshi up to have his arc, as opposed to Mamoru, who I thought was going to have the arc. And maybe Takeru.
He does have an arc. It's just it's a shorter one in this span of the story.
Yeah, and it's believable and it's good. His arc is really well done. It's at the beginning, I thought his arc was going to be the one to finish the story, and that the mother's was going to inform his, as opposed to the other way around. Like, his arc triggered the mother's emotional changes and her arc. And also, I thought the structure was interesting, where Misaki's past actually starts before her current perspective. So we don't get her current POV until, in a way, I think most of her past catches up with her current. So we have an understanding of her past before we get her current POV. There's still past interspersed in her POV, but we have background information that informs us as to why she's trapped and maybe a little bit resentful. I don't think she was ever hateful, but she was so disappointed and trapped by her culture, really, in what she in this marriage, because she wasn't willing to go against her parents. She wasn't willing to go against the culture, and she was supposed to fit this ideal, and that's really what it was. I do think that there was fear of her husband and everything. I was so mad at him. I don't know if I ever grew to like him. I grew to empathize with him, but I don't think the man suffered enough. I really don't. He changed like a light switch. Who changes like a light switch? His arc was, I'm bad. Then they start to empathize with me a little bit because they learn a little bit more. I apologize on my knees. And then all of a sudden, I am engaging with my family and my wife the way that I should have for 15 years. And it's just like magic.
Yeah, I see that a little bit. I felt like he did not change as much as he probably would over time. I thought that she was like he was more open to her prodding him, and she was more understanding of where he was coming from. I felt like she was so afraid of his iciness and his coldness, and that was him disassociating as a coping mechanism. And I felt like that when she recognized what that was and finally understood it, then she, instead of feeling like it was her, his reaction to her, she started to realize that it was him. And so she felt more confident to kind of push him and not to quiet down in his presence. And so I thought that she was going to help him kind of come out of his shell and become a better role model over time. And I do feel like the last few chapters that all, like, the whole beginning was like the course of a few weeks. And then the last few chapters were like a year. Yeah. So I think he did. I mean, it seemed like he changed quickly, but I think it was a little bit of a time sped up thing.
Yeah, that's
I
fair.
don't think he suffered enough. He didn't seem sad enough about his son, but he also just didn't have a lot of emotion. He's stuck it into the mountain.
Okay, he was also trapped by the culture in a way. Like, he has to fit these roles and these ideals for the culture and the village that he ended up in charge of. Okay, fine. And it did take them a year before they like held hands, before she kissed him, that kind of thing. So there was a progression. It just didn't feel like there was enough for me arc with him for me to end up liking him. I empathized with him and I approved of his choices and the changes that he made. I approved. But I never grew to the point where I was like, okay, I like that you guys are together. I like that you didn't go run off with the other guy. I like that you chose this life. I understand it. And it's very realistic, but I was never truly happy with that relationship.
I wanted to say about Misaki that I was so impressed with the author's handling of her arc. And as a American woman who is a mother and a wife, I really empathized with her character in the way that and like, not like I feel trapped like this, but this constant tugging between being a parent, being a mother, and the things that I want to do as an individual, being a wife. And her scenario was so patriarchal. I don't feel like I am in that position at all, but I could still understand like this kind of tug between yourself as an individual and now your responsibility as a mother is huge. And the way that the author handled it was so beautifully done, and her resistance to her children and her like gradual connection to them that came as she warmed up to the idea of that she didn't have to struggle. She could become herself. She could be herself and also be a loving mother. And like the way that changed over time was so beautifully done. And very, like I said, as a mother and as a woman, I could see so much connection with that, even though I don't have magic, I don't sword fight, I don't live in a super patriarchal society with no technology, etc. But the like core struggle felt very relatable.
Yeah, to be fair, I am bringing the unmarried perspective, like pre-marriage, like, girl, why stay with a guy who cannot love you in the way that you deserve to be loved? I understand her choices and I approve of them. I just am not happy that she's not on fire, so to speak, for the man in her life. I'm sad for her.
Something that I thought was really beautifully addressed that the author did was, so our main character, Mitsuki, has two love interests, basically her husband that she's married to, and then a literal old flame from the past, Robin. And we get a scene that is her and Robin kissing and what that looks like between their two elemental powers. I forget what the word is. Yeah, and it's ice and fire, and it's melting, and there's steamy, and there's heat. But then we get another scene towards the end of the book that is Misaki making the choice to kiss her husband Takeru, that she is able to, it's different, it is cold, but there's also underneath the cold, there is like the bubbling of the sauna and the spring, and there's a different kind of warmth and comfort. And I thought that was really beautifully done to show those two different relationships and different experiences. And there is a line even in the book where she says that she's able to hold her love for both of them. Like, she's choosing Takeru, she's staying with that life. That's the life that she's chosen. That's her home, is that town and him and her children. But she doesn't lose her love for Robin. It's something she holds both.
Yeah. It was really beautifully handled.
Yes, really. The things I admire the most in this book are the cinematic language and then the characterization. I don't feel like there was a single character in here who did not feel distinct, like their own person. While there are characters that definitely had flat arcs where they did not change, like Satsuki, I believe, which is the sister-in-law. Like she goes through loss, she stays mostly the same. She gets a little bit more energetic afterwards, after the loss of her husband, and now she just has her daughter that she has to raise. So she takes her loss and moves more into herself and her boisterous personality, and that serves them in the end as they're trying to recover. Something else I want to bring up here is I also really loved the friendships that were written into this story between Misaki, Hyori, and Setsuki.
Yeah.
Because I don't experience, again, in fantasy, many books that have strong female friendships that are also married friendships, where like you can talk about your spouses, you can talk about your children, you can talk about your past or your ambitions that you had that you let go of, or the things that you're still ambitious for even now while still trying to maintain the mantle of being a mother and motherhood and running a household. And I loved the bond and the friendship that got displayed between those three women in the course of the story. Speaking of Hyori, while it was not the main thing that made me cry, I feel like her storyline was important because in war, women are raped, and sometimes the women survive and then they are pregnant with the child of their rapist, and that's what happens to this particular character. And it was really heartening to see how her friends rallied around her in the time while she was pregnant, while they didn't know whether it was her husband's and that seed of hope that line would continue, or whether it was the rapist's child, and it does end up being that. And so Hyori she considers killing the child when she clearly knows that it was not from her husband's. And she chooses not to. She chooses mercy, but she also chooses to kill herself because already in this society, with it being as patriarchal as it is, even with the women saying, we'll help you, we'll raise it together, her character, after she suffers her assaults, can't get past the shame of it, even though it's not her fault at all. But that is part of the struggle, is what did I do wrong? And so seeing that storyline was difficult, but I think it's important.
Yeah.
And I was very curious what the author would have chosen to do with a child from that union who is a wind child, and she's a kind of a walking memorial of all that happened in this town. And I was just curious if the author would have chosen to bring that character back in the course of the series and give her her own story.
I definitely thought that child was being planted as a seed for a future story, as well as the child that was an orphan who disappeared, who was presumably taken. Because I, first of all, was surprised that there wasn't more rape referred to. Presumably some of that might have happened, and I was glad not to have to read it on the page because that's really difficult. But if there hadn't been any, it would have felt unrealistic also for the situation. I also felt like the way that Hyori was dealing with the desperate shame that she felt was so heartbreaking, and I was not at all surprised when she committed suicide. I was surprised that it hadn't happened earlier. I kept expecting, when they didn't know where she was, I kept expecting like she'd stopped eating and was wasting away, or like something, she'd walk off a cliff,
The author does a really great job with that foreshadowing that is often difficult. Her talent with this foreshadowing, these seeds that she planted throughout the story, is excellent. I know that the story is discontinued. That's what you told me, and I feel disappointed about that because I would love to see what happened with the second son. So when Mamoru passes, there's this thought that he's the first one at that age, at that young age, to
I have the quote pulled up. I highlighted the line, these are both going to make me cry, so just caveat there. The line that Misaki says to her friend Hyori while she's pregnant and doesn't know, which is, a person's tragedy doesn't define them or cancel out the good in their life. And for you, Catherine, what you're talking about, this line was the one that I saw that was a spoiler for me. But it's a decade later, a 15-year-old Hiroshi would become known as the youngest swordsman ever to master the Whispering Blade. What the world would never know was that he was the second youngest.
Yeah. I had highlighted this line. The dragon killer ripped the blade free, and Mamoru watched his own insides spill from his body. And I was also gutted at that moment. I never expected the book to start with a character who would then, like, be killed halfway. That's halfway through the book. He dies halfway through. And I didn't, like Katherine said earlier, I expected that his would be the arc. I thought a whole other thing was going to happen with their family. But when I read that, I was like, what? No, he can't die. Something's going to happen to save him. But then I reread the quote, and I was like, you can't watch your own insides spill from your body and survive. So and then we get to that quote.
But that one is highlighted 3,333 times currently on Kindle. And I can't imagine that's the only places it's highlighted. But his death and Misaki's grief, dealing with it, I think is part of what's so powerful about the story, and particularly rips my heart out as my oldest is a son, and he's 7. So he has his personality, he's got his warmth, and there's a special bond that some of us get to have with our sons. And having that experience myself, to see Misaki only get a glimpse of what the specialness that you can have so close to this loss, because it's a matter of, I don't know, maybe a week or two where she finally gets to be open with her son a little bit about who she is and what her past is. And then the war comes to their doorstep and he has to stay at the front lines to protect, and his name, Mamoru, actually is Protect, and his sword gets named after him, the Protector. And for that, having such a short window is also part of her arc, her realizing how much she lost because she couldn't let go of the old life that she wanted, and chose to resent her parents, resent her husband, resent being in the position that she is. And some of that resent really should have been and probably was for herself, because she made the choice. Robin came for her. She had the opportunity to leave with him and run and choose a different life, and she didn't. She decided to stay. Then missed out on years and years of having a different kind of relationship with her children. So I was devastated for her when she gets that realization of what she missed out on.
Yeah.
Good thing we had our tissue boxes. All right. Somebody else talk so I can cry.
I really felt like she thought of her children, and maybe it would have been a little different if she had had any daughters, but I thought that, especially starting with Mamoru, she thought of her children as her husband's children more than as her own children. And I think that she didn't bond with them. That was so devastating. She didn't bond with them as she could have, because she kind of lumped them in the category as being her husband and therefore cold, not somebody she could emotionally connect to. And it was, brutal.
I think, again, it was another really excellently done kind of thing to culturally separate out sons from daughters and the mother's purview in raising them. And that's why she so badly wanted a daughter, because she wanted to connect with another human, to be able to share herself that she can't share with her sons, prior to realizing that she actually can do that. It might break cultural norm, but she actually can, much like her father did with her as his daughter. Thought it was really interesting when her family came into the plot a little late to the rescue, as is so often realistic in life. She was reminded of the family that she grew up in, how they interacted with and treated each other, and it made her feel more bitterness for what she was experiencing now, because as long as she wasn't faced with that in proximity, then she could ignore and pretend that that's all in the past. But being faced with it again, there was some bitterness, but it also forced her, between that and Mamoru's death, it forced her to confront her reality and like her role in her reality, and how she can change her perspective and change her choices from then on. And her choice to connect with the baby and Hiroshi in a different way was really encouraging and positive. And her kind of forcing Takeru to do the same was really positive.
I agree. When her brother arrived, it was lovely because he had such a different relationship with her than any of the men of her husband and his household. So she was in this house and society where she was seen as a wife and as subservient. But when she was growing up as I guess maybe the oldest daughter, she was like herself, right? Even before she went off to school, and bringing the brother in and seeing how he didn't treat her just as like a subservient woman. He thought of her so highly and loved her so much. And I thought that was really lovely, beautifully done too. And the brother had this very distinct personality as well. And so every single character that came in added to one another's, like he really added to Misaki's persona and her character arc. Yeah. I also wanted to add the thing about the friendships between the women was so great because like she said that when her sister-in-law came into the house, that like saved her from the despair of the miscarriages that she had gone through that she very much felt responsible for. Yeah. And it was that is such a true thing, that friendships between women can be this like very powerful, very sustaining piece of life. And I just really appreciated that was brought in. And all the three women were very different from each other, but they all treated each other with love and respect and raised their kids together. It was so heartwarming.
Something I wished for the breadth of the story, for the arc that Misaki goes on, I would have loved if this had been a duology.
I could see it as a duology as well. I think one of the things I complain about a lot with books is that climaxes and the endings of books are separate. Maybe for the second book, more with Takeru's arc, because I would have liked to see him make some choices internally. Would have liked to see him struggle and make choices for his and his family's betterment that aren't just, oh, and this is what happened, epilogue style.
Imagine how different those two books would have been, because the one would be so much action and the other one would be so much emotion.
That's true.
It'd been really interesting if she had chosen to do it that way. I kind of felt like I wanted it to wrap up a lot faster after the duel between Misaki and Takeru. Like after that, I enjoyed every word that I read. The writing is lovely, the storyline was lovely, and the characters and everything. But I was like, and I feel like we're done. All that Robin coming back, I didn't actually need that. I felt like just a couple of scenes of seeing the husband and wife managing together and her accepting her role and everything, like that would have been enough for me. But I still have, 3 or 4 chapters to go here, and they're kind of long chapters, and I don't expect that much is actually going to happen. I feel like after the duel between the two of them, and then they got attacked by the assassin, which also felt like a lead into another storyline. So that probably wasn't necessary, although they did confront that person together. So that was like a unity building moment. And then you could have had an epilogue, although the business with Hyori was important, and I felt like that those extra chapters to give the time for her to give birth and have that suicide choice was important to bring into the page.
I did need Robin.
Oh, you did need Robin.
I did. I would have been upset. I would have been like, they planted so much on that thread. There needed to be some kind of resolution. I don't know that he needed to come back on the page necessarily, but I needed to learn how that was resolved. Maybe it was in a letter to her by one of those friends or something like that. But like, I wanted Robin. So I liked the longer epilogue final scene. And this is a great example. Wait, everyone is different. All of our opinions are different. We can love and hate the same book. And I didn't hate it, so I love it.
I also thought she did decide to go into an arranged marriage with a man that she maybe never even met before. Arranged marriage is still common enough around the world that there is an understanding of that you grow to love each other, that it's not the American romantic ideal, but it's this concept of choosing to be with someone for a specific reason that is not romantic, and that you grow to love them, hopefully over time, as you build your life together. And that is what happened for her. When she let go a lot of the baggage of her past and a lot of her own like hatred towards herself, and she understood why Takaru was so distant. And he saw her as like a different person also when she started showing herself as this fighter. He didn't know how much of a badass she had been in her younger days. So once they started seeing each other that way, it allowed for a deeper connection, which I do think is like when you're in a marriage for a long period of time, even if it starts from a romantic, I mean, I've been married like 18 years, and starting from like a romantic love, relationships do grow into this partnership that is a different thing. And so you don't have to start with romantic love to have that partnership, but you do have to have like empathy and patience and communication and all of these things that were missing from her earlier part for like 15 years of her marriage. And she was slowly starting to get at the end. And I did appreciate that because I feel like that's might be a lot of people's experience where they are in a relationship that is hard and they need to find ways to better it.
And to emphasize how the author gave each character their own unique voice and perspective and influence on the story. She also did that for the relationships. Like Suzuki and Takeshi, they were a romantic connection. He did go against cultural norm. He did go against his father, and he married the fisherman's daughter. And she brought joy to everybody in that little circle. And I loved it. And then her brother was in an arranged marriage. And in the beginning, he didn't love his wife. But after a year of him learning to care for her, learning to empathize with her, and being the partner in that relationship, he did say that he did love his wife now. And he loved and adored his children. And that also added to his love of his wife because they had built a family together. So I thought, again, the author did a really great job of bringing unique voice, unique perspective to the characters, but also their relationships, since relationship was incredibly important to the story build in this one.
Yeah, it definitely was not a romance in the traditional thinking of like romance or romantasy, because that would be her with Robin.
All right, we've done a lot on the structure. We've done a bunch on the character developments, even some of the plot twists we touched on between Moreaux getting killed off on page, his sacrifice, and Takaru being as cold as he was because he kept putting himself into the mountain. He would disassociate, put himself into the mountain, so everything, all of the emotions that he didn't feel like he could hold became small. Do you feel like there were any other, because the Empire being secretive and not treating them well, that's discovered very early on by Mamoru, so that's not really, that's just a through line through the story. That's not a plot twist.
I actually have something to say about that. This was my one primary criticism of the book because of the structure stuff with the other characters being woven in as a prequel, like understanding that was what was going on. So then that didn't really bother me. I got what that was. But the one criticism I had was that Mamoru became disillusioned so early in the book with the Empire, with his friend from the capital telling him these things, and then his mom kind of like agreeing, and he had so much, I mean, that scene where they fell down the mountain and then they were on the glass plane, the obsidian plane, and he realized that everything had been a lie, was so good and intense. And then the battle started, and I kind of felt like that fell away for him. And I didn't feel like his processing of his empire, keeping things from them, his personal history that he was so invested in, his family was so invested in, was all a lie, or that there was elements of mistruth in there. I wanted that to come up in his like climactic death sequence at some point, or questioning, how do I reconcile standing here and being like fodder?
Yeah, I have an answer to this, and it's in particularly in the scene that Misaki has with her son, Mamoru, where she's in the dojo with him. It is after the fight that Takaru has with Mamoru to make him defend his truth, basically. And he gets defeated and then is told, your forms are sloppy, train. And Takaru tells Misaki to fix him. And she opens up, and they have a conversation about, yes, there's a lie. They had a conversation about it, and Misaki says the line, you learn over time that the world isn't broken. It's got more pieces to it than you thought. And they all fit together, just maybe not the way you pictured when you were young. And that's part of, okay, now you need to take those pieces and reconcile them in your brain. And then also part of that conversation is going, well, if soldiers come today, would you still fight to protect me, to protect your brothers, to protect our family, to protect our town? They have a conversation about it. Not in the dojo, but they go out and see the sunrise, I believe.
Mm-hmm. I remember that.
And so that conversation is had, and that crystallizes for him how to move forward with the new information. And what he's going to focus on is this, okay, yes, the Empire has lied to me, but I can still protect my family. It doesn't change the need to protect. And I felt that was carried.
Okay. I wanted it a little more right in his like final moments of life, but that maybe he had already come to peace with it. I do remember that sunset scene as being very like powerful, where they watched the sunset together. So I have a moment that happened where I was convinced the story was going to go a completely different way, and there was going to be this crazy plot twist. And it was after Mamoru died, and they were taking all the bodies. The Empire was taking all the bodies.
Oh, did you have I'm concerned these are going to be zombie soldiers?
Yes. Did you guys have that too? There was a statement. The children were watching. I don't know if they were being burned yet, but they were watching the bodies, and they said, he can't come back. People don't come back from the Loxara. I don't know how to pronounce that word, but it's basically like heaven or afterlife. They do sometimes, but Atsushi shuddered, pulling Naoko closer. Not in a good way. They don't come back as them. There's something different, something bad. And I was like, is this going to turn into zombie? And then there was like the ghosts, the like dreams of Mamoru later, and then the shapeshifter who appeared. So like I was fully convinced we were going down this line.
Yeah, I was like, that's a massive change. And I was like trying to figure out if I was going to be okay with that. So kind of like hearing what you said about the actual series that came after this prequel, I feel the same way as I felt with that particular twist foreshadowed. Like it could be a different kind of magical force coming in that this culture didn't know of yet, that they were able to like use necromancy or something, and maybe they're not true zombies. But they had to actually destroy the body, not just for evidence purposes, but also because of the genuine usefulness of the fresh bodies. So I thought maybe there was a different kind of magical user, because we have shapeshifters and we have fire users and all that kind of thing. So like, why not? There is this aspect of if they were zombies, like I'm not sure I would have loved that particular twist. I would have been like, no, we went too far. We went too far. Just to say it was like, but that feels, just hearing that feels like it takes it too far from this magical aesthetic of this world the author has built.
Speaking of the world, let's talk about the world building in this book and the magic system, which just holy freaking cannoli. If I were to pick a world to write like a fan fiction in, it would be this. This world is so freaking cool.
Agree.
And yes, I mean, my version of it would be nowhere. I would go find like the cozy version. Hey, we're cooking and we're cooking the pot in my hand because my body temperature is so hot. It can cook.
That moment.
I loved all their interpretations of how to use the magic that these bloodlines created, between them being able to form an ice dragon to fight, the whispering blade, which is the bloodline hidden technique, and that lots of different families have a specialized technique that they're passing down generation to generation, and even doing some like selective breeding with their marriages to make them more powerful. I thought it was really cool to have air elemental users being the villains, because so often it's fire, and for it not to be fire was really refreshing. Like having them use a tornado, one of my favorite things, like if you have control over air and you don't pull the air from somebody's lungs, you haven't thought hard enough about what you can do with air.
Yeah.
So as soon as that was included, I was like, thumbs up, you got it. this is clearly very well thought out and well planned and just so detailed and amazing. I love the world. I love that the cultures all had different languages, that they needed interpreters, that some people could communicate or not, or they needed translations. Having those different cultural things touched on, even, you know, the clothing between the Ranganese, and the weapons were different from the Ranganese and the Kaigenese. The they were the people who would fire and actually were slowly encroaching, I think, very much on the Kaigenese Empire and are basically using the Kaigenese as a buffer between them and Ranga to protect their own interests and to continue to grow in power before the Ranganese try to attack again and take over the Kaigen Empire. Which, I mean, like, the political things that were happening, just all fantastic. Just very
I agree.
solid, well done.
I went into this thinking that it was going to be super, like, just traditional society. Like, I didn't expect the communicators, the, like, basically phones. When Mamoru's school friend from the Empire, I keep forgetting his name, Chulhi, maybe? When he talked about how he didn't spend all day training, he liked to play video games, I was like, whoa, mind blown. Like, this is so cool, because I just expected kind of this, like, traditionalist samurai world, and I didn't think that there would be this whole other level of a modern world outside of it. And I really appreciated that, because it's different and it added a lot of layers around their choice to maintain that tradition and Misaki's choice to, you know, move home and go into this arranged marriage. And that added so much to me. And I thought the author did a great job of, like, slowly introducing those elements too. Like, there was a lot of world building that probably didn't need to be included for just a single standalone, but she still managed to weave it together in a way that was interesting and made sense. And it took a little time, but I was able to get it all. And I agree about the writing the fanfic. This would be a great world to set some stuff in.
It's such a cool world. And that's probably why so many people are like, make more.
I wanted to point out that also, because of this world build and the different languages and stuff, that it was interesting, because we are Western readers, we are white people, and often it is quite opposite, that it's other cultures that are rare for us in the books that we read. But in this one, there was a white person, and it was new for a lot of the people in that village. So it was, like, definitely different. Or the fire users and things, they were colored a little bit differently, and their body heat was different. And it was never, their appearance was never the more important thing, just the fact that they're very different cultures and their elements felt so different, and the interaction between the elements was so difficult in a way for the cultures to learn to be around. But I think it was interesting that Mamoru was given a moment where he said that they had all come out of the same ocean at the beginning of the world, hadn't they? Because of his disillusionment and his grappling with these other cultures, other choices, other religions, and things like that. He had to figure out where he stood on it all. So he had to choose his own beliefs a little bit there. So hearing him say that even before his village encounters the white person and these other cultures and element users was very interesting. I appreciated that very much.
Mm-hmm.
Did the book deliver on its premise?
Yes.
The premise is a Japanese-inspired magical war story, and fuck yes, did it. Did it deliver? Very painfully, very heart-wrenchingly.
And from a unique perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there was a lot of things to love about this book, even though it's flawed because of being not meant to be a standalone in its initial creation. It's still amazing. It makes me very excited and mildly terrified to read Blood over Brighthaven now that I know what this author can do, and then to see what a traditionally published, edited version of one of her stories is.
Yeah, and I think book 2 is on the way for that series.
Good to know that
I
it's a
got it.
series, because maybe I need to hold off until
It might just be a
The
duology,
next
but I'm
book.
not positive about that. But I'm pretty sure that I saw the second one was coming out soon.
Okay. This was such a hard book. We did The Last Dragon of the East, which is romantasy, happy. For She Is Wrath, also, it didn't feel as happy, and there was revenge, so there was definitely like fight scenes and more going. Both of those books had fight scenes. But I did not cry over either of those books,
Yeah.
but this one just ripped my heart out, and I don't think I will ever forget it. I think that this story is incredibly important, and one that I would highly, highly recommend reading.
I was obsessed.
Yeah.
Like, it was brutal, and I just was so in every time I would pick it up to read. I was so immersed in the story and could not wait to just keep reading it.
I was so upset halfway through when Mamoru died that I think had I been reading it on my own, I probably would have put it down for a fair bit of time. I was upset.
Same.
So I wasn't like addicted at that moment. I was angry that had been done to me. I'd fallen in love with this character. I really wanted to see him succeed. I had all these ideas about what that was going to look like that felt foreshadowed in his life. And then to have it cut off so brutally, yes, it was realistic. But I was angry. I think had I been reading it on my own and not with purpose, I am not sure I would have gone back to it for a while. I'm glad that I finished it. I really enjoyed the book in the end, and I will be recommending this, but it was hard. It was very difficult. It wasn't the whole everything is happy, all is well here kind of book.
We'll wrap up with that. It's interesting because, like, if each of us got our hands on it as an editor, it would be sculpted completely differently.
So different.
Like, what would be focused on the Misaki's arc and Mamoru, those would have stayed the same, I think, through all of our preferred versions of the story, because those are the heart of the story, and what stays with you when you close the book. This has been Book Dragon Banter, our book club episode on The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. Thank you so much for listening. If you read it, did you cry? I want to know. Were the only ones? Were you able to get through it stone-faced like Takaru? Or did you cry too? Follow us on social media if you aren't already. We're on TikTok and Instagram. And our episodes are up on YouTube if you want to watch them and not just listen to them. And again, thank you so much for being here.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.